Officer Harris finds a black boy named Lucas in an abandoned car deep in the woods. Moments later, Lucas's quiet revelation shocks everyone. As Harris digs deeper into the boy's past, he uncovers a chilling truth that turns the investigation on its head. What dark secret is Lucas hiding? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Officer Harris slowed his patrol car to a crawl, his eyes fixed on the battered yellow vehicle nestled deep in the woods. The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the trees, and something about the scene made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. "That's odd," he muttered to himself, pulling over to the side of the road. With a deep breath, Harris stepped out of his car, his hand instinctively resting on his holster. The crunch of gravel under his boots seemed too loud in the quiet evening air. As he approached the abandoned car, his heart raced with anticipation. Suddenly, he caught a glimpse of movement in the back seat. Harris froze, his breath catching in his throat. Squinting through the dirty window, he saw a small figure huddled in the corner. "Hello?" he called out softly, not wanting to startle whoever was inside. "Is anyone there?" There was no response, but as Harris inched closer, he could make out the features of a young black boy, no more than 7 or 8 years old. The child sat motionless, his wide eyes staring blankly out the window. Harris's heart clenched. In all his years on the force, he'd never encountered anything quite like this. Slowly, he reached for the door handle, half expecting it to be locked. To his surprise, it opened with a rusty creak. "Hey there, little guy," Harris said gently, crouching down to meet the boy's eyes. "I'm Officer Harris. Can you tell me your name?" The boy remained silent, his gaze never wavering from the window. Harris noticed the child's clothes were dirty and torn, and there were leaves tangled in his curly hair. How long had he been out here? "It's okay," Harris continued, his voice soft and reassuring. "You're safe now. I'm here to help you." Still no response. Harris's mind raced with possibilities. Was the boy hurt? Traumatized? Where were his parents? Carefully, Harris reached out and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. The child flinched at first but didn't pull away. Harris could feel him trembling beneath his touch. "Listen, buddy," Harris said, fighting to keep his voice steady. "I know you must be scared, but I promise I won't let anything bad happen to you. Can you look at me?" Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the boy's eyes shifted from the window to Harris's face. In that moment, Harris felt a surge of protectiveness wash over him. There was something in those young eyes, a mixture of fear, confusion, and a flicker of hope that tugged at his heart. "There you go," Harris smiled warmly. "That's real brave of you. Now, how about we get you out of this car and somewhere safe? Would that be okay?" The boy hesitated for a moment, then gave a tiny nod. Harris let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "All right then," he said, reaching out his hand. "Let's go, little man. Everything's going to be just fine." As the boy took his hand, Harris felt a lump form in his throat. He didn't know what had happened to this child, or how he'd ended up alone in these woods, but he knew one thing for certain. He would do whatever it took to keep him safe. At the police station, Officer Harris led Lucas to a small, cozy room usually reserved for children. The walls were painted a soft yellow, and colorful drawings hung in frames, trying their best to make the space feel welcoming. Harris's heart ached as he watched the boy's eyes dart nervously around the room. "Here we are, buddy," Harris said gently, gesturing to a plush chair. "Why don't you have a seat while I get you something to drink?" Lucas hesitated, his small hands fidgeting with the hem of his dirty t-shirt. After a moment, he climbed into the chair, his feet barely touching the ground. Harris smiled encouragingly. "That's it. You're doing great," he said. "I'll be right back, okay?" Harris returned quickly with a glass of water and a plate of cookies. He set them on the table in front of Lucas, then pulled up a chair to sit across from him. "So," Harris began, his voice soft and patient, "can you tell me your name?" Lucas stared at the floor, his lips pressed tightly together. Harris waited, not wanting to push too hard. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, the boy spoke. "Lucas." "Lucas," Harris repeated warmly. "That's a great name. I'm Officer Harris, but you can call me Harris if you like." He paused, hoping for a response, but Lucas remained silent. "Lucas, can you tell me what happened? How did you end up in that car?" Lucas's eyes filled with tears. "I'm waiting for my parents," he mumbled, his voice trembling. Harris felt a lump form in his throat. "Your parents?" he asked gently. "Do you know where they are?" Lucas shook his head, a single tear rolling down his cheek. "They said they'd come back," he whispered. "I've been waiting." Harris's heart broke for the boy. He wanted nothing more than to wrap Lucas in a hug, to shield him from whatever had happened. Instead, he leaned forward, his voice soft but firm. "Lucas, I promise you that I'm going to do everything I can to help you find your parents," he said. "But right now, I need you to help me help you. Can you do that?" Lucas looked up, his eyes meeting Harris's for the first time. He nodded slightly. "Good," Harris smiled. "Now I bet you're hungry. How about we start with these cookies here? They're pretty tasty." He pushed the plate closer to Lucas. The boy hesitated, then reached out and took a cookie. As he nibbled on it, Harris could see some of the tension leaving his small shoulders. "That's it," Harris encouraged. "And when you're done, maybe we can find you a place to rest for a bit. You look pretty tired." Lucas nodded again, taking another bite of the cookie. Harris watched him, his mind racing with questions. What had happened to this boy's parents? How long had he been alone in that car? The mystery deepened. But for now, Harris focused on the most important thing, making sure Lucas felt safe and cared for. As Lucas finished the last crumbs of his cookie, he looked up at Officer Harris with wide, anxious eyes. "Can I go back to the car now?" he asked softly, his voice tinged with worry. Harris furrowed his brow, caught off guard by the unexpected request. "Back to the car?" he repeated gently. "Why do you want to go back there, Lucas?" The boy fidgeted in his seat, his small hands twisting in his lap. "My parents," he mumbled, barely audible. "They might be waiting for me there." Harris felt a pang in his chest. He exchanged a concerned glance with his partner, Officer Martinez, who had joined them in the room. "Lucas," Harris said, leaning forward slightly, "can you tell us more about your parents? When did you last see them?" Lucas's lower lip trembled. "They said they'd come back," he insisted, his voice rising slightly. "I have to wait for them in the car. They told me to stay there." Officer Martinez stepped closer, her voice soft and kind. "Sweetie, how long have you been waiting in that car?" But Lucas seemed to retreat into himself, shaking his head. "I need to go back," he repeated, more urgently now. "They'll be looking for me. They said they'd come back." Harris felt a chill run down his spine. Something was deeply wrong here. The boy's insistence on returning to the abandoned car, his fixation on waiting for parents who hadn't come back, it all pointed to a situation far more complicated and heartbreaking than they had initially thought. "Lucas," Harris said gently, trying to catch the boy's eye, "I know you want to go back to the car, but it's not safe for you to be there alone. We want to help you find your parents, but we need you to stay here with us for now. Can you understand that?" Lucas's eyes welled up with tears. "But what if they come back and I'm not there?" he whispered, his voice cracking. Harris felt his heart breaking for the child. He reached out and gently placed a hand on Lucas's shoulder. "I promise you, Lucas, if your parents come looking for you, we'll make sure they find you. But right now our job is to keep you safe. Can you trust us to do that?" The boy looked at Harris, his eyes searching the officer's face. After a long moment, he gave a small, hesitant nod. Harris smiled encouragingly. "That's good, Lucas. You're being very brave." As Lucas wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, Harris and Martinez exchanged worried glances. The mystery surrounding this child and his missing parents was deepening, and Harris couldn't shake the feeling that they were only scratching the surface of a much larger, more tragic story. As Lucas wandered around the police station, his curious eyes took in every detail. Officer Harris watched him closely, a mixture of concern and affection growing in his heart. The boy's quiet resilience touched something deep within him. Suddenly, Lucas stopped in front of a large bulletin board covered with various photos and notices. His small hand reached out, pointing to one particular image. "That's my parents' car," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. Harris felt his heart skip a beat. He quickly moved to Lucas's side, his eyes following the boy's finger. The photo showed a mangled yellow car, crushed beyond recognition. It was eerily similar to the one he had found Lucas in earlier that day. With a sinking feeling, Harris recognized the image. It was from a fatal accident that had occurred days ago. A couple had died instantly when their car veered off the road and crashed into a tree. The case had been closed, marked as a tragic accident. Harris's mind raced. Could it be possible? Was Lucas the child of that ill-fated couple? The timeline matched up, and the similarity of the cars was undeniable. He glanced down at Lucas, who was still staring at the photo, his small face a mix of confusion and hope. Harris felt a lump form in his throat. How could he tell this innocent child that the parents he had been waiting for were never coming back? Officer Martinez approached, noticing the tense scene. Harris pulled her aside, speaking in a low voice. "I think we might have figured out who Lucas is," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of this revelation. "Remember that car accident from a few weeks back? The one with the young couple?" Martinez's eyes widened in recognition. "You don't mean—" Harris nodded grimly. "Lucas just identified their car. It matches the one I found him in. I think he might be their son." Martinez covered her mouth, her eyes darting to Lucas, who was still engrossed in the bulletin board. "Oh, that poor child," she whispered. "He doesn't know, does he?" "No," Harris replied, his voice thick with emotion. "He's been waiting all this time, thinking they were coming back for him." They both watched Lucas for a moment, their hearts heavy with the knowledge of his tragic situation. "What do we do now?" Martinez asked softly. Harris took a deep breath, steeling himself for the difficult task ahead. "We need to confirm his identity first. Then we'll have to find a way to tell him the truth, but not yet. He's been through so much already." As they watched Lucas continue to explore the station, both officers felt the weight of the heartbreaking revelation they now carried. The mystery of Lucas's situation had been solved, but the real challenge lay ahead. How to help this brave, resilient boy come to terms with a truth that would change his life forever. The weight of the truth settled heavily on Harris's shoulders as he watched Lucas continue to explore the police station. The boy's innocent curiosity was a stark contrast to the heartbreaking reality that had just been uncovered. Harris felt his chest tighten with a mix of sorrow and compassion for the child who had unknowingly lost everything. Officer Martinez stood beside Harris, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I can't believe he's been out there all this time, just waiting," she whispered, her voice cracking slightly. Harris nodded, unable to find words. The image of Lucas sitting alone in that battered car, day after day, hoping for his parents' return, was almost too much to bear. He felt a surge of protectiveness wash over him, along with a deep sense of responsibility for the boy's well-being. As the full impact of the situation sank in, Harris found himself battling a whirlwind of emotions. There was relief at finally understanding Lucas's circumstances, but it was overshadowed by the crushing sadness of what the boy had endured and what he had yet to face. "We need to handle this carefully," Harris said softly to Martinez, his eyes never leaving Lucas. "He's been through so much already. Breaking this news, it's going to change his whole world." Martinez nodded in agreement, her face etched with concern. How do we even begin to explain something like this to a child? Harris sighed heavily, running a hand through his graying hair. "I don't know," he admitted, "but we have to find a way. He deserves the truth, but we need to be gentle. He's already lost so much." As they watched Lucas, now sitting quietly at a desk, coloring with some crayons a kind-hearted officer had found, Harris felt an overwhelming urge to protect him. The boy's resilience in the face of unimaginable tragedy was both heartbreaking and inspiring. "I can't help but think about how strong he is," Harris murmured. "To have gone through all that and still have hope, it's incredible." Martinez placed a comforting hand on Harris's arm. "He's going to need that strength in the days to come," she said softly. "And he's going to need us, too." Harris nodded, feeling the weight of the truth he now carried. He knew that the journey ahead would be difficult, but he was determined to be there for Lucas every step of the way. As he watched the boy, lost in his innocent world of crayons and paper, Harris silently vowed to do whatever it took to help Lucas through the challenging times that lay ahead. The officers gathered in a small huddle, their faces etched with concern and sorrow. They spoke in hushed tones, trying to keep their emotions in check as they discussed Lucas's heartbreaking situation. Officer Martinez dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, while Officer Johnson cleared his throat repeatedly, fighting back tears. Harris stood slightly apart, his gaze fixed on Lucas, who was now curled up in a corner of the station, his small body finally succumbing to exhaustion. The sight of the boy, so vulnerable and alone, tugged at Harris's heartstrings. "What's going to happen to him now?" Officer Martinez asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "With both his parents gone and no immediate family we can contact?" The question hung heavily in the air, each officer feeling the weight of responsibility for Lucas's future. They all knew the harsh realities of the system, and the thought of this sweet, innocent child being thrust into it made their hearts ache. Harris stepped closer to the group, his eyes never leaving Lucas. "For now, we need to focus on keeping him safe and comfortable," he said softly. "We'll figure out the rest as we go." The other officers nodded in agreement, grateful for Harris's calm leadership in this difficult moment. They watched as Harris walked over to where Lucas was sleeping, his steps quiet and measured. Kneeling beside the boy, Harris gently tucked a soft blanket around Lucas's small frame. The child stirred slightly but didn't wake, his face peaceful in sleep. Harris's hand lingered for a moment on Lucas's shoulder, a gesture of comfort and protection. As Harris stood up, he felt a lump form in his throat. The sight of Lucas, so small and alone, brought back memories of his own losses and the loneliness he'd felt. He blinked rapidly, pushing back the tears that threatened to fall. Harris paced the station, his brow furrowed with concern. The social services office had closed for the day, leaving Lucas's immediate future uncertain. The thought of the boy spending the night in a cold, unfamiliar place made Harris's heart ache. He glanced over at Lucas, who was now awake and sitting quietly in a chair, his small hands clutching a stuffed animal one of the officers had found for him. The boy's eyes were wide and confused, darting around the busy station. Taking a deep breath, Harris made his decision. He approached his supervisor, Captain Reynolds, with determination in his steps. "Sir," Harris said, his voice low but firm, "I'd like to take Lucas home with me tonight, just until we can sort things out with social services in the morning." Captain Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure about this, Harris? It's not exactly by the book." Harris nodded, his resolve unwavering. "I know, sir, but I can't bear the thought of him spending the night here or in some temporary facility. He needs a safe, quiet place to rest and process everything that's happened." The captain studied Harris's face for a moment, then sighed. "All right, Harris, I trust your judgment. Just make sure you file all the necessary paperwork." Relief washed over Harris. He thanked the captain and turned back to Lucas, kneeling down to meet the boy's eyes. "Hey, buddy," Harris said softly, his voice gentle. "How would you like to come stay at my house tonight? I've got a comfy spare room and we can have some hot chocolate before bed. What do you think?" Lucas looked up at Harris, his brown eyes filled with a mix of uncertainty and hope. After a moment, he nodded slowly. "Okay," the boy whispered, his voice barely audible. Harris felt a warmth spread through his chest. He helped Lucas gather his few belongings and led him out to his patrol car. As they drove through the quiet streets, Harris glanced in the rearview mirror, watching Lucas stare out the window at the passing houses. The weight of responsibility settled on Harris's shoulders. He knew this was just a temporary solution, but he was determined to make Lucas feel safe and cared for, even if only for one night. As Harris pulled into his driveway, he glanced back at Lucas, who was peering out the window with wide eyes. The boy's curiosity seemed to have awakened, even if he remained silent. "Here we are, buddy," Harris said softly, opening the car door for Lucas. "This is my home." Lucas stepped out, clutching his stuffed animal tightly. He followed Harris up the walkway, his eyes darting around, taking in the modest house and well-kept yard. Once inside, Harris showed Lucas to the spare room. "This is where you'll sleep tonight," he explained, his voice gentle. "Why don't you get settled while I make us some dinner?" Lucas nodded, still not speaking, but his eyes seemed to convey a silent thank you. In the kitchen, Harris rummaged through his fridge and pantry. He wasn't much of a cook, but he managed to put together a simple meal of chicken soup and grilled cheese sandwiches. As he worked, he could hear Lucas's soft footsteps exploring the house. "Dinner's ready," Harris called out, setting 2 steaming bowls on the table. Lucas appeared in the doorway, his stuffed animal still clutched tightly to his chest. Harris helped him into a chair, noticing how the boy's clothes hung loosely on his small frame. As they ate, Harris watched Lucas carefully. The boy ate slowly at first, but soon he was spooning the soup into his mouth with increasing eagerness. Harris felt a pang in his heart, realizing how hungry Lucas must have been. "There's plenty more if you want seconds," Harris said, pushing the plate of sandwiches closer to Lucas. Lucas looked up, meeting Harris's eyes for a moment before nodding and reaching for another sandwich. As he ate, Harris noticed the boy's shoulders starting to relax, the tension slowly easing from his small body. "You know," Harris said softly, "it's okay if you don't want to talk right now. But if you do, I'm here to listen." Lucas paused, his spoon hovering over his bowl. He didn't speak, but he nodded, acknowledging Harris's words. As they finished their meal, Harris couldn't help but feel a growing connection to this quiet, resilient boy. He knew there were still so many unanswered questions about Lucas's parents and what had happened, but for now he was just grateful to provide a safe haven for the night. Over the next few days, Officer Harris devoted himself to caring for Lucas. Each morning, he'd wake the boy with a gentle knock on the spare room door, his heart warming at the sight of Lucas's sleepy face peeking out from under the covers. "Time for breakfast, buddy," Harris would say softly. "Then we've got another checkup at the hospital." Lucas would nod silently, padding out to the kitchen where a bowl of cereal and fresh fruit awaited him. Harris watched with a mixture of relief and concern as Lucas ate with increasing appetite each day. At the hospital, Dr. Martinez greeted them with a warm smile. "How's our young patient today?" she asked, ruffling Lucas's hair. Harris answered for the still quiet boy. "He's eating better, Doc. Sleeping through the night, too." Dr. Martinez nodded approvingly as she examined Lucas. "That's great news. His color is improving, and he's gaining weight. You're doing a wonderful job, Officer Harris." As they left the hospital, Lucas tugged on Harris's sleeve. "When will I see my parents?" he asked, his voice small but hopeful. Harris felt his heart clench. He knelt down, meeting Lucas's eyes. "Soon, buddy," he said, hating the lie, but unable to bear crushing the boy's spirit. They want you to get better first." Lucas seemed to accept this, nodding solemnly. Harris hoped this white lie would give Lucas the time he needed to heal, both physically and emotionally, before facing the harsh truth. Back at home, Harris tried to create a sense of normalcy for Lucas. They'd watch cartoons together, Harris chuckling at the occasional giggle that escaped Lucas's lips. In the evenings, Harris would read bedtime stories, watching as Lucas's eyes grew heavy with sleep. Yet every day without fail, Lucas would ask the same question, "When will I see my parents?" And every day Harris would give the same answer, "Soon, buddy, soon." As the days passed, Harris could see Lucas growing stronger. The boy's cheeks filled out, and a spark returned to his eyes. But with each passing day, Harris felt the weight of his lie growing heavier. He knew he couldn't protect Lucas from the truth forever, but for now, he held on to the hope that this temporary shelter from reality was what Lucas needed most. As the days turned into weeks, Lucas began to blossom in Harris's home. The once quiet boy started to come out of his shell, his shy smiles growing more frequent and his laughter filling the once silent rooms. One sunny afternoon, Harris found Lucas in the backyard chasing after a butterfly. The boy's giggles echoed through the air, a sound that made Harris's heart swell with joy. He watched from the porch, a warm smile spreading across his face. "Look, Officer Harris," Lucas called out, his eyes bright with excitement. "It's so pretty." Harris chuckled, stepping off the porch to join Lucas. "It sure is, buddy. You know, butterflies are special. They start as little caterpillars and grow into something beautiful." Lucas's eyes widened with wonder. "Really? That's amazing." As they watched the butterfly flutter away, Harris felt a tug on his sleeve. He looked down to see Lucas gazing up at him, a serious expression on his face. "Can we make cookies?" the boy asked, his voice hopeful. Harris laughed, surprised by the sudden request. "Cookies? Well, I'm not much of a baker, but we can sure try." In the kitchen, flour dusted every surface as Harris and Lucas attempted to follow a simple recipe. Lucas stood on a chair, his tongue poking out in concentration as he carefully measured ingredients. When Harris accidentally dropped an egg on the floor, Lucas burst into a fit of giggles. "You're silly, Officer Harris," he said between laughs. Harris couldn't help but join in, realizing how long it had been since he'd laughed like this. As they waited for the cookies to bake, filling the house with a warm, sweet aroma, Harris felt a sense of contentment wash over him. That night, as Harris tucked Lucas into bed, the boy hugged him tightly. "Thank you for the cookies," Lucas mumbled sleepily, "and for taking care of me." Harris felt his throat tighten with emotion. "You're welcome, buddy. I'm glad you're here." As he closed Lucas's bedroom door, Harris leaned against the wall, overwhelmed by the feelings surging through him. For years, his life had been nothing but work and solitude. Now, with Lucas in his home, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The boy's presence had brought light back into his life, filling a void he hadn't even realized was there. Harris walked to the living room, picking up a framed photo of Lucas that he'd recently placed on the mantel. Looking at the boy's smiling face, Harris felt a deep affection blooming in his heart. For the first time in a long while, he felt truly happy. Harris couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right about Lucas's parents' accident. Even as he watched the boy thrive in his care, a shadow of doubt lingered in the back of his mind. One evening, after tucking Lucas into bed, Harris sat at his kitchen table, spreading out the case files he'd brought home from the station. He pored over the reports, his brow furrowed in concentration. The official story seemed straightforward enough, a tragic car accident on a rainy night. But something about it just didn't sit right with him. Harris had seen plenty of accidents in his years on the force, and this one felt different. The next day, while Lucas was at a therapy session, Harris decided to revisit the crash site. He drove out to the lonely stretch of road where the accident had occurred, parking his cruiser on the shoulder. As he stepped out, a cool breeze rustled through the trees, sending a shiver down his spine. Harris walked along the roadside, his keen eyes scanning the area. He noticed skid marks on the pavement, still visible weeks after the crash. Crouching down, he traced them with his fingers, noting their unusual pattern. It didn't look like a typical loss of control in wet conditions. He made his way into the woods where the car had come to rest. Bits of broken glass and twisted metal still littered the ground. Harris carefully picked his way through the debris, looking for anything that might have been overlooked. As he searched, a glint of something metallic caught his eye. Bending down, Harris picked up a small object partially buried in the leaves. It was a cufflink, tarnished but still recognizable. His heart began to race. This wasn't mentioned in any of the reports. Could it have belonged to Lucas's father? Or was it from someone else entirely? Back at the station, Harris pored over the case files once more, this time with renewed vigor. He cross-referenced witness statements, examined photos of the wreckage, and scrutinized the forensic reports. The more he dug, the more inconsistencies he found. One detail in particular stood out. A witness had reported seeing another vehicle speeding away from the scene shortly after the crash. At the time, it had been dismissed as unrelated, But now Harris wasn't so sure. As he connected the dots, a troubling picture began to emerge. What if Lucas's parents' deaths weren't an accident at all? The thought sent a chill through Harris. If he was right, it meant that whoever was responsible was still out there, and Lucas might still be in danger. Harris leaned back in his chair, rubbing his tired eyes. He knew he had to tread carefully. If his suspicions were correct, he couldn't risk alerting anyone who might be involved. But he also knew he couldn't let this go. For Lucas's sake and for the sake of justice, he had to uncover the truth. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across Harris's backyard. The air was filled with the sound of laughter as Harris and Lucas tossed a frisbee back and forth. It was moments like these that made Harris's heart swell with affection for the boy who had unexpectedly come into his life. As Lucas ran to catch the frisbee, he stumbled slightly, giggling as he regained his balance. Harris couldn't help but smile at the boy's joy. It was a far cry from the quiet, withdrawn child he had found in that abandoned car just a few weeks ago. "Nice catch, buddy," Harris called out, clapping his hands encouragingly. Lucas beamed with pride, his gap-toothed grin lighting up his face. He trotted back to Harris, the frisbee clutched tightly in his small hands. As he reached the officer, he suddenly paused, his brow furrowing in concentration. "Officer Harris," Lucas said, his voice soft and hesitant. "I just remembered something." Harris knelt down, bringing himself to eye level with the boy. "What is it, Lucas?" he asked gently. Lucas bit his lip, his eyes distant as if trying to grasp a fading memory. "There was a man," he said slowly, "near our car, right before the accident." Harris felt his heart skip a beat. He tried to keep his voice calm and steady. "A man? Can you tell me more about him, Lucas?" The boy's face scrunched up in concentration. I don't remember much. It was dark. But he was there, and then everything went crazy." Harris placed a comforting hand on Lucas's shoulder. "It's okay, buddy. You're doing great. Can you remember anything else about the man? What he looked like, or what he was doing?" Lucas shook his head, frustration evident in his eyes. "I'm sorry, I can't remember more. It's all blurry." "That's all right, Lucas," Harris reassured him. "You've done really well remembering that much. Thank you for telling me." As they resumed their game, Harris's mind was racing. This new piece of information could change everything. If there was indeed a man near the car right before the accident, it opened up a whole new avenue of investigation. Could this mysterious figure have been involved in what happened to Lucas's parents? Harris felt a renewed sense of urgency. He needed to dig deeper, to uncover the truth behind that fateful night. But he also knew he had to be careful. If there was foul play involved, whoever was responsible might still be out there, and they might not take kindly to someone poking around in their business. As he watched Lucas chase after the frisbee, laughing and carefree, Harris made a silent vow. He would get to the bottom of this no matter what it took. He owed it to Lucas, and to the parents the boy had lost. The truth was out there, and Harris was determined to find it. Harris sat at his desk, his eyes strained from hours of staring at the computer screen. The office around him was quiet, most of his colleagues having gone home for the night. But Harris couldn't leave, not when he was so close to uncovering the truth about Lucas's parents' accident. He had been combing through traffic camera footage and security tapes from businesses near the crash site, hoping to find any clue that might corroborate Lucas's memory of a man near the car. It was tedious work, but Harris was determined. As he clicked through another set of grainy images, something caught his eye. He leaned in closer, his heart racing. There, on a CCTV camera from a nearby gas station, he saw a figure moving away from the direction of the crash site. The timestamp showed it was just minutes before the accident occurred. Harris's fingers flew over the keyboard as he enhanced the image. The figure was male, dressed in dark clothing. Though the quality wasn't great, it was clear enough to see that the man was looking over his shoulder, as if checking to see if he was being followed. "Got you," Harris muttered under his breath. He rewound the footage, watching it again and again. Each time, his suspicion grew stronger. This wasn't just a random passerby. The man's body language, the timing of his appearance. It all pointed to something more sinister. Harris leaned back in his chair, his mind whirling. This discovery raised so many questions. Who was this man? What was he doing at the scene? And most importantly, was he somehow involved in the crash that took Lucas's parents' lives? The officer glanced at the clock, realizing how late it had gotten. He needed to get home to Lucas, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was on the verge of uncovering something big, something that could change everything they thought they knew about that tragic night. As he gathered his things to leave, Harris's determination solidified. He would find out who this mystery man was and what role, if any, he played in the accident. For Lucas's sake and for the sake of justice, he wouldn't rest until he uncovered the truth. Harris's determination to uncover the truth led him down a rabbit hole of investigation. He spent countless hours poring over records, making phone calls, and following leads. His efforts finally paid off when he stumbled upon a crucial piece of information that sent chills down his spine. The man in the CCTV footage wasn't just a random stranger. Harris discovered that he had been in business with Lucas's parents. The officer's heart raced as he pieced together the connections, each new detail painting a more troubling picture. Harris learned that the man's name was Robert Thompson, a former business partner of Lucas's father. They had owned a small tech startup together, but things had gone sour in the months leading up to the accident. Harris found records of heated emails and text messages between Thompson and Lucas's father, filled with accusations and threats. One particular message caught Harris's attention. It was sent just days before the crash, with Thompson writing, "You'll regret this, Mark. I swear you'll pay for what you've done." The officer's hands shook as he read the message. Could this be the motive behind the accident? Had Thompson's anger and resentment driven him to do something unthinkable? Harris leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He thought of Lucas, the sweet boy who had been waiting for parents who would never return. The weight of this discovery pressed heavily on his heart. If Thompson had indeed played a role in causing the accident, it meant Lucas's loss wasn't just a tragic accident, it was something far more sinister. As he sat there, surrounded by case files and computer printouts, Harris felt a mix of emotions. He was angry at the possibility that someone could have deliberately caused such pain. He was sad for Lucas and the innocence the boy had lost. But most of all, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Harris knew he had to tread carefully. These were serious allegations, and he needed solid evidence before he could act. But he was more determined than ever to get to the bottom of this mystery. For Lucas's sake, and for the sake of justice, he would uncover the truth, no matter where it led him. Harris's heart pounded as he approached Robert Thompson's house. The modest suburban home looked peaceful, but Harris knew that behind its walls lurked a man who might be responsible for destroying a family. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the confrontation ahead. Knocking firmly on the door, Harris waited, his hand resting near his holster. After a moment, the door creaked open, revealing a middle-aged man with graying hair and tired eyes. "Robert Thompson?" Harris asked, his voice steady despite his inner turmoil. Thompson nodded, eyeing Harris's uniform warily. "That's me. What's this about, officer?" Harris's gaze hardened. "I need to talk to you about Mark and Sarah Johnson, and the accident that took their lives." Thompson's face paled, but he quickly composed himself. I don't know what you're talking about. That was a terrible tragedy, but I had nothing to do with it." "Mind if I come in?" Harris asked, though his tone made it clear it wasn't really a question. Once inside, Harris got straight to the point. He laid out the evidence he had gathered, the CCTV footage, the threatening emails, the business disputes. With each piece of information, Thompson grew more agitated, his denials becoming weaker. "Look, Mr. Thompson," Harris said, his voice low and intense. "I know you were there that night. I know about your falling out with Mark. What I don't know is exactly what happened. But I will find out. So why don't you make it easier on yourself and tell me the truth?" Thompson's facade cracked. He slumped into a chair, burying his face in his hands. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that," he whispered, his voice trembling. Harris leaned forward, his heart racing. "What wasn't supposed to happen?" "The crash," Thompson admitted, looking up with tears in his eyes. I just wanted to scare them, to make them see reason." As the truth spilled out, Harris felt a mix of triumph and horror. Thompson revealed how he had tampered with the Johnsons' car, intending to cause a minor malfunction that would force them to stop. He had hoped to confront them, to pressure them into reconsidering their stance on a business deal that he believed would save their failing company. "But it went wrong," Thompson said, his voice barely audible. "The car, it went out of control. I panicked. I ran. I never meant for them to die. I never meant to orphan their son." Harris listened, his jaw clenched, as Thompson confessed to his role in the tragedy. The officer's thoughts turned to Lucas, the innocent boy whose life had been shattered by this man's actions. As Thompson's admission came to an end, Harris stood up, his expression grim. "Robert Thompson," he said, reaching for his handcuffs. "You're under arrest for the deaths of Mark and Sarah Johnson." Harris's hands trembled as he locked the handcuffs around Thompson's wrists. The weight of what had just transpired settled heavily on his shoulders. He had solved the case, but at what cost? The truth was far more painful than he could have imagined. As he led Thompson to the patrol car, Harris's mind raced. How could someone's greed and desperation lead to such a tragedy? His heart ached for Lucas, the innocent boy who had lost everything because of one man's selfish actions. At the station, Harris watched as Thompson was processed and placed in a holding cell. The reality of the situation hit him like a tidal wave. Justice had been served, but it couldn't bring back Lucas's parents. It couldn't erase the trauma the boy had endured. Harris slumped into his chair, running his hands over his face. The small sense of closure he felt was overshadowed by the daunting task ahead. How could he possibly explain this to Lucas, the boy who still believed his parents would come back for him? As he drove back home, Harris's mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Anger at Thompson's actions, sorrow for Lucas's loss, and a deep, overwhelming sense of responsibility for the boy who had unexpectedly become such an important part of his life. Pulling into his driveway, Harris saw Lucas's face peering out the window. The boy's eyes lit up at the sight of Harris, and a small smile spread across his face. Harris's heart clenched. How could he shatter that innocence? Taking a deep breath, Harris stepped out of the car. He knew he had to be strong for Lucas, but he had no idea how to begin this conversation. As he walked towards the house, each step felt heavier than the last. Opening the front door, Harris was greeted by Lucas's eager voice. "Officer Harris, you're back." The boy ran up to him, wrapping his arms around Harris's waist in a tight hug. Harris knelt down, meeting Lucas's eyes. The boy's smile faded as he noticed the serious expression on Harris's face. "Lucas," Harris began, his voice gentle but filled with emotion. "We need to talk about something very important." Days passed and Lucas's health improved steadily under Harris's care. The boy's cheeks had regained some color, and his eyes sparkled with more life than when Harris had first found him in the woods. The change was remarkable, but Harris knew that the hardest part was yet to come. One quiet afternoon, Harris sat Lucas down on the living room couch. The boy looked up at him with curious eyes, sensing something important was about to happen. Harris took a deep breath, steeling himself for the conversation he had been dreading. "Lucas," Harris began softly, his voice filled with gentle care. "Do you remember when we talked about your parents?" Lucas nodded, his small hands fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. "You said they'd come back soon," he replied, hope still evident in his voice. Harris's heart clenched. He reached out and took Lucas's hands in his own, giving them a reassuring squeeze. "I need to tell you something about your mom and dad, buddy. It's going to be hard to hear, but I want you to know that I'm here for you, okay?" Lucas's brow furrowed, confusion clouding his eyes. "Okay," he whispered. With a heavy heart, Harris began to explain. He used simple words, trying his best to convey the difficult truth in a way that Lucas could understand. He told him about the accident, how his parents had been hurt very badly, and that they had gone to heaven. As Harris spoke, Lucas listened quietly. His young mind struggled to grasp the full meaning of Harris's words, but he could sense the sadness and the weight behind them. Tears welled up in Harris's eyes as he watched the boy's face, searching for signs of understanding. So, they're not coming back? Lucas asked, his voice small and uncertain. Harris shook his head, his throat tight with emotion. No, buddy. They can't come back, but they are guiding you from up there. But I want you to know something very important. He leaned in closer, making sure Lucas was looking right at him. You are not alone. I'm here for you, and I always will be. I promise to take care of you and love you, just like your parents did. Lucas's lower lip trembled and tears began to roll down his cheeks. He didn't fully understand the permanence of death, but he could feel the loss. Harris pulled the boy into a tight hug, letting Lucas bury his face in his chest. It's okay to be sad, Harris murmured, rubbing soothing circles on Lucas's back. It's okay to cry. I'm right here with you, and I'm not going anywhere. As Lucas's small body shook with sobs, Harris held him close, offering the comfort and security the boy so desperately needed. In that moment, Harris silently vowed to be the family Lucas had lost, to provide the love and support that would help him heal and grow. On a crisp autumn morning, Harris and Lucas made their way through the quiet cemetery. The air was still, broken only by the soft crunch of leaves beneath their feet. Harris held Lucas's small hand in his own, feeling the boy's grip tighten as they approached the gravesites. Lucas's eyes widened as he saw the two headstones side by side, adorned with fresh flowers. Harris had made sure everything was perfect for this moment. He knelt down beside Lucas, placing a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. These are your parents' graves, buddy, Harris said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. This is where we come to remember them and feel close to them. Lucas nodded silently, his eyes fixed on the names etched in stone. He reached out a tentative hand, tracing the letters with his fingers. Harris watched, his heart heavy with emotion, as Lucas stood there trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Can they hear us? Lucas asked, his voice small and uncertain. Harris smiled gently. Some people believe they can. Would you like to say something to them? Lucas hesitated, then nodded. He took a step closer to the gravestones, still holding tightly to Harris's hand. Hi, Mommy. Hi, Daddy, he said softly. I miss you. Tears welled up in Harris's eyes as he listened to Lucas's simple, heartfelt words. The boy continued to talk, telling his parents about his new life with Harris, about the toys he played with, and the things he was learning at school. His voice grew stronger as he spoke, as if finding comfort in the one-sided conversation. As Lucas talked, Harris noticed the tension in the boy's shoulders slowly easing. It was as if speaking to his parents, even in this way, was helping Lucas process his grief. Harris squeezed Lucas's hand gently, offering silent support and encouragement. After a while, Lucas fell quiet. He stood there looking at the gravestones with a mixture of sadness and curiosity. Harris knelt down beside him, wrapping an arm around the boy's shoulders. How are you feeling, Lucas? Harris asked gently. Lucas leaned into Harris's embrace, his eyes still on the graves. Sad, he said simply. But okay too. Is that weird? Harris shook his head, pulling Lucas a little closer. Not at all, buddy. It's okay to feel lots of different things. Your parents loved you very much, and it's okay to be sad that they're not here. But it's also okay to feel good about the happy memories you have with them. Lucas nodded, seeming to understand. He looked up at Harris, his eyes shining with unshed tears. Can we come back sometimes? Of course we can, Harris replied, his voice thick with emotion. Anytime you want to visit, we'll come together. I'll always be here with you. As they stood there together, the autumn breeze rustling the leaves around them, Harris felt a deep sense of responsibility and love for the boy beside him. He knew that helping Lucas find closure would be a long journey, but he was committed to being there every step of the way. As Harris and Lucas left the cemetery, a gentle breeze rustled through the trees, carrying with it the scent of autumn leaves. Harris held Lucas's hand, feeling the warmth of the boy's small fingers intertwined with his own. The weight of the moment settled over them like a comforting blanket. On the drive home, Harris glanced in the rearview mirror, watching Lucas as he gazed out the window. The boy's face was pensive, but there was a calmness there that hadn't been present before. Harris felt a surge of pride and affection, knowing that he had helped Lucas take an important step in his healing journey. Back at home, Harris busied himself in the kitchen, preparing a simple dinner of grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup. As he worked, his mind wandered, reflecting on the whirlwind of changes that had swept through his life since that fateful day. He found Lucas in the abandoned car. He thought about how quiet and empty his house had been before Lucas arrived. Now it was filled with the sounds of laughter, the patter of small feet, and the constant chatter of a curious young boy. Harris smiled to himself, realizing how much joy Lucas had brought into his life. As he set the table, Harris caught sight of a drawing Lucas had made earlier that week. It showed two stick figures holding hands, one tall, one small, standing in front of a house. Above the figures, Lucas had written in his wobbly handwriting, "Me and Officer Harris." The simple drawing tugged at Harris's heartstrings. Sitting down to eat with Lucas, Harris watched as the boy dug into his sandwich with gusto. He felt a warmth spread through his chest, a feeling of contentment and purpose that he hadn't experienced in years. It was in that moment that Harris knew, without a doubt, that he wanted to make their bond permanent. After dinner, as Lucas settled on the couch with a book, Harris sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. He pulled out his laptop and began researching the adoption process. The more he read, the more certain he became of his decision. He wanted to provide Lucas with a loving, stable home, not just for now, but forever. Harris's heart raced with excitement and nervousness as he considered the journey ahead. He knew there would be challenges, but as he looked over at Lucas, peacefully reading his book, he felt ready to face whatever came their way. As the adoption process began, Harris felt a renewed sense of purpose coursing through him. Each day brought new opportunities to bond with Lucas and create lasting memories. The once quiet house now echoed with the sounds of laughter and animated conversations. One sunny afternoon, Harris took Lucas to the local park. The boy's eyes lit up at the sight of the playground, and he raced towards the swings. Harris couldn't help but smile as he pushed Lucas higher and higher, the boy's delighted squeals filling the air. "Higher, Officer Harris, I want to touch the sky," Lucas exclaimed, his face beaming with joy. Harris chuckled, his heart swelling with affection. "All right, buddy, but not too high. We don't want you flying away." As they walked home hand in hand, Lucas pointed out every interesting leaf and rock along the way. Harris listened intently, marveling at the boy's curiosity and enthusiasm for the world around him. Back at home, Harris decided it was time to teach Lucas how to make his famous chocolate chip cookies. They stood side by side in the kitchen, flour dusting their clothes as they mixed the ingredients. "Now the secret is to add just a pinch of cinnamon," Harris whispered conspiratorially, winking at Lucas. The boy nodded solemnly, taking his cookie-making duties very seriously. When the warm, gooey cookies came out of the oven, they sat at the kitchen table, dunking them in cold milk and savoring every bite. As the days passed, Harris found himself opening up more and more. He shared stories from his childhood, taught Lucas how to tie his shoelaces, and even started a nightly ritual of reading bedtime stories together. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Lucas looked up at Harris with wide, earnest eyes. "Officer Harris," he said softly, "are you going to be my new dad?" Harris felt a lump form in his throat. He wrapped an arm around Lucas's shoulders and pulled him close. "I'd like that very much, buddy, if that's what you want too." Lucas nodded, snuggling closer to Harris. They sat in comfortable silence, watching as the sky turned from orange to pink to deep purple. As Harris tucked Lucas into bed that night, he realized how much his life had changed. The loneliness that had once consumed him was gone, replaced by a deep sense of love and belonging. His home, once a quiet refuge from the world, now buzzed with energy and warmth. Looking around Lucas's room, filled with drawings, toys, and the soft glow of a nightlight, Harris felt a profound sense of gratitude. He was no longer just an officer doing his duty. He was becoming a father, with all the joys and challenges that came with it. As the weeks turned into months, Lucas began to settle into his new life with Harris. The once quiet house now buzzed with the energy of a young boy finding his place in the world. Harris watched with pride as Lucas slowly blossomed, his shy demeanor giving way to moments of playfulness and curiosity. One sunny Saturday morning, Harris found Lucas sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by crayons and paper. The boy was drawing intently, his small tongue poking out in concentration. "What are you working on there, buddy?" Harris asked, kneeling down beside him. Lucas looked up, his eyes bright. "I'm drawing our family," he said softly, holding up the paper. Harris's heart swelled as he looked at the colorful stick figures. There was Lucas, small and smiling, holding hands with a taller figure that was unmistakably Harris. But off to the side, Lucas had drawn two more figures with halos above their heads. "Who are they?" Harris asked gently, although he already knew the answer. "That's my mom and dad," Lucas replied, his voice quiet. "They're in heaven now, but I wanted them to be in the picture too." Harris pulled Lucas into a warm hug, feeling the boy's small arms wrap around his neck. "That's beautiful, Lucas. I'm sure they'd love to be in our family picture." As they hung the drawing on the refrigerator, Lucas looked up at Harris with wide eyes. "Do you think they can see us from heaven?" Harris knelt down to Lucas's level, choosing his words carefully. "I believe they can, buddy, and I'm sure they're very proud of you." Lucas nodded, seeming satisfied with the answer. But later that night, as Harris tucked him into bed, the boy's questions returned. "Officer Harris," Lucas whispered, clutching his teddy bear close, "do you think my parents miss me?" Harris sat on the edge of the bed, gently stroking Lucas's hair. "I'm sure they do, Lucas. But I also think they'd be happy to know that you're safe and loved here with me." Lucas was quiet for a moment, processing this. Then he asked, "Is it okay that I miss them sometimes?" "Of course it is," Harris assured him, his voice soft and comforting. "It's okay to miss them and to feel sad sometimes. But remember, I'm always here for you, no matter what." Lucas nodded, his eyelids growing heavy. As he drifted off to sleep, Harris stayed by his side, marveling at the resilience of this young boy who had been through so much. With the adoption process nearing its end, Harris decided to take Lucas on a special outing to celebrate. He chose a beautiful park with sprawling green fields and a colorful playground. As they arrived, Lucas's eyes widened with excitement. "Can I go play, Officer Harris?" he asked eagerly, bouncing on his toes. Harris smiled warmly. "Of course, buddy. And remember, you can call me Dad now if you'd like." Lucas hesitated for a moment, then nodded with a shy smile before dashing off towards the swings. Harris watched as the boy pumped his legs, soaring higher and higher. The sound of Lucas's laughter filled the air, pure and carefree. As Lucas ran from the swings to the slide and then to the monkey bars, Harris felt a swell of pride in his chest. He marveled at how far they had come together. The quiet, traumatized boy he had found in that abandoned car was now full of life and joy. Harris joined Lucas at the sandbox, helping him build a grand sandcastle. They worked together, laughing as they decorated it with twigs and pebbles. In that moment, Harris felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This was what family was all about. A few days later, the day of the final adoption hearing arrived. Harris stood nervously in front of his bedroom mirror, adjusting his tie. He wanted everything to be perfect for this momentous occasion. "Lucas, are you ready?" he called out. The boy appeared in the doorway, dressed in a smart little suit that Harris had bought specially for the day. "I'm ready, Dad," Lucas said, testing out the word with a tentative smile. Harris's heart melted at hearing Lucas call him Dad for the first time. He knelt down and straightened Lucas's tie. "You look very handsome, son," he said, his voice thick with emotion. At the courthouse, Harris and Lucas stood side by side before the judge. Harris could feel Lucas's small hand in his, squeezing tightly. The judge reviewed their case, asking a few questions about their life together. After what seemed like an eternity, the judge smiled and announced, "I am pleased to approve this adoption. Congratulations. You are now officially father and son." A wave of emotion washed over Harris. He looked down at Lucas, who was beaming up at him. In that moment, Harris realized that Lucas was truly his son in every way that mattered. Their journey together had only just begun, but Harris knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as a family. As Harris and Lucas stepped through the front door of their home, a new sense of belonging washed over them. The house that had once echoed with loneliness now buzzed with the energy of their newfound family. "We're home, son," Harris said, his voice filled with warmth and pride. Lucas looked up at him, his eyes shining. "Home," he repeated softly, as if testing the word on his tongue. Harris knelt down and pulled Lucas into a tight hug. The boy nestled into his arms, and Harris felt his heart swell with love. It was hard to believe that just a few months ago, he had been a solitary figure going through the motions of life. Now here he was, holding his son close, their lives forever intertwined. As they settled into their evening routine, the house came alive with sounds that had been absent for far too long. Lucas's laughter echoed through the halls as he chased after a new toy truck Harris had bought to celebrate their official family status. The pitter-patter of small feet on hardwood floors created a rhythm that Harris never knew he had been missing. While preparing dinner, Harris found himself smiling at the simplest things, setting 2 plates on the table instead of 1, cutting Lucas's food into bite-sized pieces, and listening to the boy's animated chatter about his day at school. After dinner, they snuggled up on the couch to watch a movie. Lucas curled up against Harris's side, his head resting on his father's chest. As the movie played, Harris's mind wandered back to that fateful day on the quiet suburban road. He remembered spotting the beaten-up yellow car deep in the woods, and the small, silent boy sitting in the back seat. Who could have known that a routine patrol would lead to this moment? Harris marveled at how a single encounter had changed the course of both their lives. He had gone from a lonely officer nearing retirement to a father with a renewed sense of purpose. As the credits rolled, Harris looked down to find Lucas fast asleep. Carefully, he lifted the boy and carried him to his bedroom. Tucking Lucas in, Harris planted a gentle kiss on his forehead. "Good night, son," he whispered. "I love you." Standing in the doorway, Harris watched Lucas's peaceful sleeping form for a moment longer. His heart swelled with gratitude for this unexpected gift of fatherhood. The silence that once haunted his home had been replaced by the soft breathing of his sleeping child, a sound more precious than any he had ever known. Days turned into weeks. The early morning sun peeked through the curtains as Harris helped Lucas get ready for his first day of nursery school. The once quiet house now buzzed with activity, filled with the sounds of little feet pattering across the floor and excited chatter. "Are you ready for your big day, buddy?" Harris asked, kneeling down to tie Lucas's shoelaces. Lucas nodded enthusiastically, his eyes bright with anticipation. "Yes, Daddy, I can't wait to make new friends." Harris's heart swelled at the word Daddy. It still felt like a beautiful dream every time Lucas called him that. He smoothed down Lucas's shirt and adjusted his backpack, making sure everything was perfect. As they walked hand in hand to the car, Harris couldn't help but marvel at how much his life had changed. The man who once lived in solitude now found joy in these simple moments of fatherhood. During the drive to the nursery school, Lucas sang along to his favorite songs on the radio. Harris glanced at him through the rearview mirror, a smile playing on his lips. The sight of Lucas, happy and carefree, filled him with a warmth he had never known before. Arriving at the school, Harris helped Lucas out of the car. They walked towards the colorful building, its walls adorned with children's artwork. Lucas's grip on Harris's hand tightened slightly as they approached the entrance. "It's okay to be a little nervous," Harris reassured him gently. "But remember, you're going to have so much fun, and I'll be right here to pick you up when school's over." Lucas looked up at him, his eyes full of trust. "Promise?" "I promise, son," Harris said, giving Lucas's hand a gentle squeeze. As they reached the classroom door, Lucas's teacher greeted them with a warm smile. Harris knelt down to Lucas's level, straightening his backpack one last time. "Have a great day, Lucas. I love you," Harris said, his voice filled with emotion. Lucas threw his arms around Harris's neck, hugging him tightly. "Thank you, Daddy," he whispered. "Thank you for being my new daddy and taking care of me. I love you too." Harris felt his eyes mist over at Lucas's words. He hugged his son back, savoring the moment. As Lucas pulled away, he gave Harris a big smile before turning to join his classmates. Watching Lucas walk into the classroom, Harris felt a mix of pride and joy wash over him. The once lonely man now stood with a heart full of love and a smile on his lips. As he walked back to his car, Harris marveled at how one small boy had brought so much happiness into his life. If you enjoyed the story of Officer Harris and Lucas, I handpicked this next story that will touch your heart. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.